Ben ritrovati amici del rock and roll sul mio canale Twitch e sulle diverse piattaforme che raccontano i contenuti di questo canale. Una delle mie più grandi passioni, l'abbiamo sempre detto, anche visto il titolo del format che abbiamo qui inserito, il Club del Libro, quindi leggere, la lettura, ma leggere di che cosa? Leggere delle cose che ci appassionano, in realtà anche al di fuori della carta stampata. Quindi oggi ho il piacere di parlare del genere musicale che mi ha salvato la vita e che ha salvato la vita a tantissime fantastiche donne. Per questo motivo, visto che è uscito l'edizione italiana per volo libero di Revenge of the She Punks, ho l'autrice con noi del libro, Vivien Goldman. Welcome, Vivien.
Hi, ciao.
Welcome, straight from Jamaica.
Live from Jamaica.
That's amazing. Thank you for your time. Like I was saying in Italian, this book is about a lot of stories of female punk rocker that actually has been saved by that genre. With that musical genre, they started to express themselves, and this is something that even if I'm a man, I got in common with those experiences. If it wasn't for punk rock, probably I wouldn't be here. And so, first of all, the very easy question is why punk rock music was the perfect environment for women to stand out.
Well, there's a number of reasons. Number one, it was such an open door policy in punk. It was like anything goes. And it was an arena for the outsider and for the marginalized. And tragic as it is to say, women who are like 50% of the world were the marginalized outsider. So it was the time of punk. It was a combination of the aesthetics of the sound, where you did not have to be a major virtuoso, you could just have a go. And because many women, virtually all women, had no role models, right? So you had to have that space to enter that punk afforded, and then you had to not be super proficient to start to express yourself and be accepted. So that is it on the aesthetic side, because punk is like a gateway. I often think that after you've been playing punk for a long time, you know, the tendency is you get better. So at a certain point, it's like most people do move towards something more complex in post-punk, you know, but that's it. Punk is the gateway. And punk opened the gates to an extent for women to express themselves in a way that they had never previously been permitted within the system of the patriarchal music industry, basically entirely populated by, and this is no offense to my white brothers, I'm a white sister, you know, but that sort of not like you, Andrea, that sort of reductive thinking, guys who are used to controlling everything and having it their way, so they determine what a sound should be, what will be perceived as sexy, what will be perceived as commercial. And if I may make one more point before we move on, just quickly. Yeah. The time at which punk began was a revolutionary moment, particularly for females. Legislation was just coming in that would enable a woman to buy her own home without being signed for by a husband or a father. So the feminist movement was starting to make legal inroads. And I can assure you, Andrea, in that context, as a young woman coming up, at that point, I felt anything was possible with the help of punk.
And that's totally understandable. One of the few things I like the most about the history of human being and the history of music is that they're so deeply connected, even if they don't want to. If we consider 1977, the year of punk rock, the rise of the moment, it was the same year when Elvis Presley died. I mean, he was the main character of a whole system, the typical male, patriotic, US superstar, worldwide fans in the war. That's just a combination of events, maybe, but it's symbolic.
Yes, absolutely. It was like a passing of the baton. Yes. Yes, and people like the Clash. Do you remember the Clash, the group, the Clash, and no Elvis, Beatles, or the Rolling Stones in 1977? Yeah. Yes, so there was a sense of the culture shifting. Uh, you got to put it in the sense of the times, which in a way was not that different from our times, because there was a sense of existential dread hovering over things. It was sort of post-colonial, post the Second World War. Britain had lost the empire. There was massive unemployment. There was oil embargoes. There was, bodies weren't being, the sort of scene, bodies were not being buried. Garbage was not being collected. Everything was collapsing as it seemed. So yet somehow we did struggle on, and actually we're still here talking today, aren't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully, as you no doubt hear echoes of our current situation, our current very challenging situation, hopefully we can derive from it the fact that hopefully you and me will talk again in 5 years and we'll still be here. Yeah, but at the time it's very challenging to struggle through endless series of things. Yeah.
You name the role models, and in the book that I really enjoyed, there is a passage when you actually name some of the classic rock role female role models. Obviously, before punk, we had Janis Joplin, we had all those kind of acts, but why punk rock was the determination of a real cultural shift in terms of, because in my opinion, Janis Joplin, she was quite strong and powerful too, but maybe was a different moment and context.
Very different. No, and it's funny you should mention the outstanding, astounding Janis Joplin. Out of all artists, if you know her story, as I'm sure you do, you see how she suffered at the
I know.
hands of all those blokes. She had no, like, I'm sure she had some posse, some friends, but within the industry, she had no support system. She was dealing constantly and feeling diminished by their judgments and their value system of what made a woman valuable. So, she's a sort of almost like a martyr in our movement in that sense, while being not to say she's completely a victim, because her work will stand forever. But you know what I mean? Personally, she suffered so much. And if she'd have had one often thinks, if people had had a more supportive context, not having to deal with those gender issues so much, it would have been interesting to see what we might have heard.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I agree. You said this is the perfect moment in time to talk about this argument. For real, the very first time I got into your book was a few years ago when I got the original version, and now I read it in Italian through Volo Libero. And still today, maybe because I am into human rights defending and stuff like that through this beautiful yellow color that it's the color of human rights, in my experience as an activist for amnesty. I think that this is the perfect moment again to raise that kind of awareness, because apart from the Western world, where actually we have a large number of examples of artists, women that actually made it to the big stages. In some other part of the world, there is still that kind of violent feeling against women, and women cannot do whatever they're able to do, getting a job, getting the kind of respect from this society. So again, it's an uplifting story. All these stories in this book are uplifting, especially when they go outside the boundaries of the so-called first and second world.
You know what, Andre? I'm so thrilled you've really read the book. And when you were just speaking, I knew you had in mind a one group that I talk about, which was a very wrenching story, the group Pragash, um, uh, um, which means light, and they are in the only predominantly Muslim area of India, Kashmir. Now, I have to preface this by saying, the Muslim establishment really tried to help them. It's not an anti-Muslim thing, it's the extremist thing that certain of the mullahs put a fatwa, a death threat on this little, they were young schoolgirl trio, and they were doing pretty interesting work. They were adapting traditional music, traditional instruments with electric guitar. Bless them, just a ragazzi, right? Young girls. And I found this clip from Indian TV, and you see her. She's walking away from the interviewer. She's just said to him, "I've tried. You cannot have a girl band in Kashmir." And as she walks away, there's this slump of her shoulders, where her heart's, mission has been defeated. Let's hope temporarily. But I want to stress, I don't want it to be, the Muslim government there, were really trying to support her, but the threat to her family was too great from the extremists.
No, I know. We still have examples of not only girl bands, but like several artists, male, female bands that are still persecuted for just playing rebel music, because this is actually the real deal. When it comes to punk rock, we're talking about rebel music. Uh,
Absolutely.
there is a passage when you in the book, when you go through the for example, the situation in Northern Ireland with RIA, and that was the perfect environment for another step of rebellion, another step of rebel songs and all this kind of things. But let's get back to the girl situation. The punk years were also the years of several different movements inside the genre. The riot girls movement, that was very important back in the days. But what it's really interesting about your book is that we do have today's example. Maybe they're not called riot girls anymore, so we got Pussy Riot, and it's a completely different thing. But I mean, the spirit, the feeling, the will, the message, and the content, it's still there.
I think so, definitely. And what's more is I think that punk, which is, often people try and dismiss it. They say it's been so commodified, it can no longer communicate the message. But I don't think it really is going to work that way, because, while people want to use electrified instruments and a sort of rocky feeling, and they're not expert, it's like you flow towards punk and that loud, fast aggression that is typical of punk is kind of a normal way for rambunctious kids to sound, if you know what I mean. Of course, I have a slightly different aesthetic view of punk, being me, the punk professor, thinking about these things so much. I tend to think that if you bust out and make an original sort of sound, it doesn't always need to be fast and loud to be punk. But that's, maybe I just like to be controversial.
I'm
But
with you.
it's a funny thing, you see, one of the women musicians who's had the most impact in a revolutionary way, which is something I've never really encountered before, is one of the most successful musicians in the world, if ever, which is Beyonce. I've got to be honest, when we talk about the outside of punk who stirs everybody to action, but she has gone like she is the heart of the beast, if you know what I mean. And yet her message has galvanized young women, not to say older women too, but young women may be more vulnerable or in need of guidance theoretically, Yeah, I have to give props to Beyonce. And in the book, I also talk about the example of her relationship with her sister, which is clearly very strong, and her sister does the more experimental work. And in the book, I realized when it came to the end and I had to write the conclusion, there's a lot of bands in the book who are actually DNA sisters. And it made me wonder, is it because of all the obstacles, that really to make it work, it's helpful to actually have a sister and by your side. And the idea is, if you have not got a blood sister, you find one, you find that person where you have that chemistry, that click of creativity. And I think this will carry on. I don't think you can, when they talk about the genie in the bottle, I don't think you can necessarily put the genie of women's independent creativity back in the bottle at this point. But in terms of the industry as a whole, I don't know, Andrea, what you think and what it's like in Italy, but I tend to feel that until we really have, and again, this is not anti-man, because there's plenty of cool guys who I work with nonstop, but you know what I mean? It's that mentality that I'm criticizing. And, until we really have more women who are not trying to outman the men by having earned their position, by aligning themselves with forces that are not necessarily friendly to their sisters, unless we have really more female DJs, A&R guys, women as the head of record companies, the shift will not be extreme enough. We'll always be more vulnerable. But what we're talking about at that point, I'm sure you understand, is a systemic shift in society. That is what we need to bring our voices really forward, because almost the majority of women, at the end of the day, very often, people have this urge to procreate, Andrea, okay? And they make babies. And 8 times out of 10, who's looking after the baby? Do you see what I mean? And literally, the weight of life often has prevented women from exploring their full potential artistically. That's what I'm talking about, a systemic shift. That's why we love guys like you, Andrea, who grew up knowing about the women's movement and don't have those oppressive attitudes where they want to damp down women's possibilities in order to make themselves feel bigger and more in control. Am I resonating with you, Andrea?
Totally. I got it 100%. And what's interesting is that I always, when I was young and I was like teenager and I was looking for a way to express myself, I said I need maybe a language that talks about social issues. And for me, that I consciously started listening to music in the mid 90s. The choice was between punk rock music and rap music. So when you mentioned Beyonce, I was wondering, uh, a revolution like the one that happened in punk rock for women could have been the same in the world of rap music and hip hop, because so many things have changed also from day one. And I'm thinking about all the great and beautiful artists that we met in the 90s or in the 80s, in a genre that was maybe even stronger in terms of male control.
I think if I read you right, there has been a movement really saying, where are the political musicians and so on, especially during the Occupy movement in New York, there was a lot of
Yep.
talk about that. But actually, I think I'm seeing, there's always somebody, isn't it that, I mean, he's not a woman. Is he a man in the traditional sense? Because we're really broaching new boundaries here. But obviously there was Kendrick Lamar, again a man. But Little Nas X, I was thinking of people who are really confronting boundaries and so on. Women of today, Yeah, they're there. You know, people like Angelique Kidjo, I took like some of them in my book, coming up from the projects, the council estates, like the girls who did that song Silver Spoon, which is a very radical song. I like to think that in culture, it's like a river and that there'll always be a spring flowing and that will continue to flow. And even though the voice of protest sometimes gets dimmed, again, it's like a human need. And I think it will express itself somehow.
A human need that we can see in a more wide speech about genre itself, sexual genres. One of my biggest icons of the last 10 years is Laura Jane Grace from
Oh, yeah.
Against Me. She's been through a very important public situation of transition, and the fact that she was able to embrace music and the music of her band Against Me, to talk about that process. It's something that probably would have been worked the same way if it wasn't for X-ray specs and all the beautiful women that came in 1997, in 1977, 78, 79.
Yes. There's a new documentary out about polystyrene and X-ray specs, by the way. It's
Yes,
definitely
it's coming out from BBC, I guess. Yeah.
excellent. It's definitely worth seeing. Actually, I speak in it, but that many other people do as well. Poly was such a groundbreaker. But I think the new voices expressing these ideas, you mentioned Laura Jane Grace. I mean, honestly, Andrea, I feel like we should do a whole show about this separately because this area is so dynamic and ever changing. I mean, the question is, I asked one transgender artist in the book who was a woman, is now a man. I said to him, you know, I'm still interviewing you because you're in a famous woman punk band, but do you think you've gone over to the other team? Have you forfeited the right really to be in a book about women in punk? And so, sorry, not she. He says he's just grateful to be accepted anywhere and still to have his voice heard. But it's a very moot question, and we're striking at the very heart of the culture wars right now with these issues. Do you think that Laura, just to break the fourth wall for a minute, do you think that Laura Jane Grace's music changed after? You see, that's so interesting. Andrea does not think that her music changed after she transitioned from being a man. Whereas people like me, I was always, when we started out, you'll see in my early writings, I'm actually having a collection of my old journalism coming out next year, and you'll be able to see, you know, the questions that we asked then, because there was such a lack, in fact, a vacuum of, except for like folky people, Goddess bless her, like Joni Mitchell, but there was such a sort of vacuum of women directed music. And the big question was that for me was answered by groups like the Raincoats. If anybody's, you know, you heard of the Raincoats.
Yep.
What would women's music sound like? Because we were expecting and wondering and hoping maybe there would be a different textural quality to the sound. And I think there has been, not always, but there is a sound that is maybe more common in women artistry, female artistry. It's a more shifting sound. It's not as rigid. You absolutely turn your back on four on the floor. You know, it's very organic and flowing. So it's interesting that when Laura Jane Grace transitions, his music stays like a man's. So he still sounds like a man. But now we're opening up such huge and controversial areas that honestly, try and set up a show and we'll have a panel and we'll discuss it because it's very, very deep.
I know. The only thing that to me changed by listening to her music was how deep I finally understood reading in between the lines of the lyrics of the song. So when she came out with that thing, I said, okay, now I got 100% of the lyrics. So I
In
got
terms
the
of your relationship with the artist, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So the book finally is out in Italian, La vendetta delle punk. How much of that revenge was important for you as a woman?
Well, it's funny because when I told Chrissy Hynde, the singer, who's my old roommate, and she's in the book, and I said we were doing this, I was calling it Revenge of the She-Punks, and she was very sniffy, and she was like, "Ha, I don't do revenge." And I'm like, well, it's not that kind of revenge. It's more that kind of revenge where when the whole system doesn't want you to exist and create the way you want, and you somehow get through and manage to do it, that is revenge.
Okay.
I've been doing music too. I have a new album out with Youth, and I've got to say, one interviewer did ask me, "Is that the revenge?" And it's true. People have been liking it. This album called Next Is Now, and the thing is, it's nice to be able to do it when I'm completely flouting convention, because women and men are shut up and not sing unless you're in something like jazz, you see, where Abby Lincoln or somebody had a career her whole life, but in the more pop dance milieu, you're meant to, unless you're a huge superstar like Madonna, you're
Yep.
meant to be gone. So I'm glad not to be gone.
No. I got the message, and it's clear, that it's a process that it's not ended. It's a process that it's got to go on, and not only because we're talking to we got the same soul. Okay, we get. I feel that empathy with you, but when it comes to like even my colleague. When I work at some television or radio system, I still see that kind of closed mentality, super macho mentality. That I said to myself, is that possible in 2022 to still have those kind of mentality? And so until I'm gonna see this kind of attitude, I'm gonna try to raise women voices as much as I can by using these little microphones or any platform. And this is a great step to start out.
Andrea, I'm so moved. I'm just so excited we met. I mean, I know we're just doing an interview, but I hope we continue the dialogue. It's been very inspiring even to talk to you right now and to be communicating with Italy, a country, is obviously one of the most adorable countries there is,
Thank you for your time, and I actually hope to physically see you very soon. Thank you for your job, and thank you for the content of everything you write.
Grazie molto, Andrea.
Grazie.
Ciao.
See you soon. Ciao.